The Last House in C Street by Dinah Mulock. I am not a believer in ghosts in general. I see no good in them. They come, that is, they are reported to come, so irrelevantly, purposelessly, so ridiculously, in short, that one's common sense as regards this world, one's supernatural sense of the other, are alike revolted. And 9 out of 10 capital ghost stories are so easily accounted for, and in the 10th, when all natural explanation fails, one who has discovered the extraordinary difficulty there is in all society in getting hold of that very slippery article called a fact, is strongly inclined to shake a dubious head, ejaculating, "Evidence, a question of evidence." But my unbelief springs from no dogged or contemptuous skepticism as to the possibility, however great the improbability, of that strange impression upon, or communication to, spirit in matter, from spirit wholly immaterialized, which is vulgarly called a ghost. There is no credulity more blind, no ignorance more childish than that of the sage who tries to measure heaven and earth and the things under the earth with the small 2-foot rule of his own brains. Dare we presume to argue concerning any mystery of the universe? It is inexplicable and therefore impossible. Premising these opinions, though simply as opinions, I am about to relate what I must confess is to me a thorough ghost story, its external and circumstantial evidence being indisputable, while its psychological causes and results, though not easy of explanation, are still more difficult to be explained away. The ghost, like Hamlet's, was an honest ghost. From her daughter, an old lady who, bless her good and gentle memory, has since learned the secrets of all things, I learnt this veritable tale. "My dear," said Mrs. MacArthur to me, it was in the early days of table moving, when young folk ridiculed and elder folk were shocked at the notion of calling up one's departed ancestors into one's dinner table, and learning the wonders of the angelic world by the bobbings of a hat or the twirlings of a plate. "My dear," continued the old lady, "I do not like playing at ghosts." "Why not? Do you believe in them?" "A little." "Did you ever see one?" "Never. But once I heard—" She looked serious, as if she hardly liked to speak about it, either from a sense of awe or from fear of ridicule. But no one could have laughed at any allusions of the gentle old lady, who never uttered a harsh or satirical word to a living soul, and this evident awe was rather remarkable in one who had a large stock of common sense, little wonder, and no ideality. I was rather curious to hear MacArthur's ghost story. "My dear, it was a long time ago, so long that you may fancy I forget and confuse the circumstances, but I do not. Sometimes I think one recollects more clearly things that happened in one's teens— I was 18 that year— than a great many nearer events. And besides, I had other reasons for remembering vividly everything belonging to this time, for I was in love, you must know." She looked at me with a mild deprecating smile, as if hoping my youthfulness would not consider the thing so very impossible or ridiculous. No, I was all interest at once. "In love with Mr. MacArthur," I said, scarcely as a question, being at that Arcadian time of life when one takes as a natural necessity, and believes as an undoubted truth, that everybody marries his or her first love. "No, my dear, not with Mr. MacArthur." I was so astonished, so completely dumbfoundered, for I had woven a sort of ideal around my good old friend, that I suffered Mrs. MacArthur to knit in silence for full 5 minutes. My surprise was not lessened when she said, with a little smile, "He was a young gentleman of good parts, and he was very fond of me. Proud, too, rather, for though you might not think it, my dear, I was actually a beauty in those days." I have very little doubt of it. The slight, lithe figure, the tiny hands and feet, if you had walked behind Mrs. MacArthur, you might have taken her for a young woman still. Certainly people lived slower and easier in the last generation than in ours. "Yes, I was the beauty of Bath. Mr. Everest fell in love with me there. I was much gratified, for I had been reading Miss Burney's Cecilia, and I thought him exactly like Mortimer Delville. A very pretty tale, Cecilia. Did you ever read it? No. And to arrive at her tale, I leaped to the only conclusion which could reconcile the two facts of her having had a lover named Everest, and being now Mrs. MacArthur. Was it his ghost you saw? No, my dear, no. Thank goodness, he is alive still. He calls here sometimes. He has been a good friend to our family. Ah, with a slow shake of the head, half pleased, half pensive, you would hardly believe, my dear, what a very pretty fellow he was. One could scarcely smile at the odd phrase pertaining to last-century novels and to the loves of our great-grandmothers. I listened patiently to the wondering reminiscences which still further delayed the ghost story. But, Mrs. MacArthur, was it in Bath that you saw or heard what I think you were going to tell me? The ghost, you know? Don't call it that. It sounds as if you were laughing at it. And you must not, for it is really true as that I sit here an old lady of 75, and that then I was a young gentlewoman of 18. Nay, my dear, I will tell you all about it. We have been staying in London, my father and mother, Mr. Everest, and I. He had persuaded them to take me. He wanted to show me a little of the world, though it was but a narrow world, my dear, for he was a law student, living poorly and working hard. He took lodgings for us near the Temple, in C Street, the last house there looking on to the river. He was very fond of the river, and often of evenings when his work was too heavy to let him take us to Ranelagh or to the play, he used to walk with my father and mother and me up and down the Temple Gardens. Were you ever in the Temple Gardens? It is a pretty place now, a quiet grey nook in the midst of noise and bustle. The stars look wonderful through those great trees, but still it is not like what it was then, when I was a girl. Ah, no, impossible. It was in the Temple Gardens, my dear, that I remember we took our last walk, my mother, Mr. Everest, and I, before she went home to Bath. She was very anxious and restless to go, being too delicate for London gaieties. Besides, she had a large family at home, of which I was the eldest, and we were anxiously expecting the youngest in a month or two. Nevertheless, my dear mother had gone about with me, taken me to all the shows and sights that I, a hardy and happy girl, longed to see, and entered into them with almost as great enjoyment as my own. But tonight she was very pale, rather grave, and steadfastly bent on returning home. We did all we could to persuade her to the contrary, for on the next night but one was to have been the crowning treat of all our London pleasures. We were to see Hamlet at Drury Lane, with John Kemble and Sarah Siddons. Think of that, my dear. Ah, you have no such sights now. Even my grave father longed to go, and urged in his mild way that we should put off our departure. But my mother was determined. At last Mr. Everest said, I could show you the very spot where he stood, with the river. It was high water, lapping against the wall, and the evening sun shining on the Southwark houses opposite. He said, it was very wrong, of course, my dear, but then he was in love, and might be excused. Madam, said he, it is the first time I ever knew you think of yourself alone. Myself, Edmund? Pardon me, but would it not be possible for you to return home, leaving behind, for 2 days only, Mr. Thwaite and Mistress Dorothy? Leave them behind? Leave them behind? She mused over the words. What say you, Dorothy? I was silent. In very truth, I had never been parted from her in all my life. It had never crossed my mind to wish to part from her, or to enjoy any pleasure without her, till within the last 3 months. Mother, don't suppose But here I caught sight of Mr. Everest, and stopped. Pray continue, Mistress Dorothy. No, I could not. He looked so vexed, so hurt, and we have been so happy together. Also, we might not meet again for years, for the journey between London and Bath was then a serious one, even to lovers, and he worked very hard, had few pleasures in his life. It did indeed seem almost selfish of my mother. Though my lips said nothing, perhaps my sad eyes said only too much, and my mother felt it. She walked with us a few yards, slowly and thoughtfully. I could see her now, with her pale, tired face, under the cherry-colored ribbons of her hood. She had been very handsome as a young woman, and was most sweet-looking still. My dear, good mother. Dorothy, we will no more discuss this. I am very sorry, but I must go home. However, I will persuade your father to remain with you till the week's end. Are you satisfied? No, was the first filial impulse of my heart, but Mr. Everest pressed my arm with such an entreating look that almost against my will I answered yes. Mr. Everest overwhelmed my mother with his delight and gratitude. She walked up and down for some time longer, leaning on his arm. She was very fond of him, then stood looking on the river, upwards and downwards. I suppose this is my last walk in London. Thank you for all the care you have taken of me. And when I am gone home, mind, oh mind, Edmund, that you take special care of Dorothy. These words, and the tone in which they were spoken, fixed themselves on my mind, first from gratitude, not unmingled with regret, as if I had not been so considerate to her as she to me. Afterwards, but we often err, my dear, in dwelling too much on that word. We finite creatures have only to deal with now, nothing whatever to do with afterwards. In this case I have ceased to blame myself for others. Whatever was, being past, was right to be, and could not have been otherwise. My mother went home next morning alone. We were to follow in a few days, though she would not allow us to fix any time. Her departure was so hurried that I remember nothing about it, save her answer to my father's urgent desire, almost command, that if anything was amiss she would immediately let him know. Under all circumstances, wife, he reiterated, this you promise? I promise. Though when she was gone he declared she need not have said it so earnestly, since we should be at home almost as soon as the slow Bath coach could take her and bring us a letter. And besides, there was nothing likely to happen. But he fidgeted a good deal, being unused to her absence in their happy wedded life. He was, like most men, glad to blame anybody but himself, and the whole day and the next was cross at intervals with both Edmund and me, but we bore it, and patiently. It will be all right when we get him to the theatre. He has no real cause for anxiety about her. What a dear woman she is, and a precious. Your mother, Dorothy. I rejoiced to hear my lover speak thus, and thought there hardly ever was young gentlewoman so blessed as I. We went to the play. Ah, you know nothing of what a play is nowadays. You never saw John Kemble and Mrs. Siddons. Though in dresses and shows it was far inferior to the Hamlet you took me to see last week, my dear, and though I perfectly well remember being on the point of laughing when in the most solemn scene it became clearly evident that the ghost had been drinking. Strangely enough, no after events connected therewith, nothing subsequent, ever drove from my mind the vivid impression of this my first play. Strange, also, that the play should have been Hamlet. Do you think that Shakespeare believed in what people call ghosts? I could not say, but I thought Mrs. MacArthur's ghost very long in coming. Don't, my dear, don't. Do anything but laugh at it. She was visibly affected, and it was not without an effort that she proceeded in her story. I wish you to understand exactly my position that night. A young girl, her head full of the enchantment of the stage, her heart of something not less engrossing. Mr. Everest had supped with us, leaving us both in the best of spirits. Indeed, my father had gone to bed, laughing heartily at the remembrance of the antics of Mr. Grimaldi, which had almost obliterated the Queen and Hamlet from his memory, on which the ridiculous always took a far stronger hold than the awful or sublime. I was sitting, at the window, chatting with my maid Patty, who was brushing the powder out of my hair. The window was open halfway, and looking out on the Thames, and the summer night, being very warm and starry, made it almost like sitting out of doors. There was none of the awe given by the solitude of a midnight closed room. when every sound is magnified and every shadow seems alive. As I said, we had been chatting and laughing, for Patty and I were both very young, and she had a sweetheart too. She, like every one of our household, was a warm admirer of Mr. Everest. I had just been half scolding, half smiling at her praises of him, when St. Paul's great clock came booming over the silent river. 11, counted Patty. Terrible late we be, Mistress Dorothy. Not like bath hours, I reckon. Mother will have been in bed an hour ago, said I, with a little self-reproach at not having thought of her till now. The next minute my maid and I both started up with a simultaneous exclamation. Did you hear that? Yes, a bat flying against the window. But the lattices are open, Mistress Dorothy. So they were, and there was no bird or bat or living thing about, only the quiet summer night, the river, and the stars. I'd be certain sure I heard it, and I think it was just a bit like somebody tapping. Nonsense, Patty. But it had struck me thus, though I said it was a bat. It was exactly like the sound of fingers against a pane, very soft, gentle fingers, such as in passing into her flower garden, my mother used often to tap outside the schoolroom casement at home. I wonder, did father hear anything? The bird, you know, Patty, might have flown at his window, too. Oh, Mistress Dorothy! Patty would not be deceived. I gave her the brush to finish my hair, but her hand shook too much. I shut the window and we both sat down facing it. At that minute, distinct, clear, and unmistakable, like a person giving a summons and passing by, we heard once more the tapping on the pane. But nothing was seen, not a single shadow came between us and the open air, the bright starlight. Startled I was, and awed, but I was not frightened. The sound gave me even an inexplicable delight, but I had hardly time to recognize my feelings, still less to analyze them, when a loud cry came from my father's room. Dolly! Dolly! Now, my mother and I both had one name, but he always gave her the old-fashioned pet name. I was invariably Dorothy. Still, I did not pause to think, but ran to his locked door and answered. It was a long time before he took any notice, though I heard him talking to himself and moaning. He was subject to bad dreams, especially before his attacks of gout. So my first alarm lightened. I stood listening, knocking at intervals, until at last he replied. What do we want, child? Is anything the matter, father? Nothing. Go to thy bed, Dorothy. Did you not call? Do you not want anyone? Not thee. Oh, Dolly, my poor Dolly. And he seemed to be almost sobbing. Why did I let thee leave me? Father, you are not going to be ill? It is not the gout, is it? For that was the time when he wanted my mother most, and indeed when he was wholly unmanageable by anyone but her. Go away. Get to thy bed, girl. I don't want thee. I thought he was angry with me for having been in some sort the cause of our delay, and retired very miserable. Patty and I sat up a good while longer, discussing the dreary prospect of my father's having a fit of the gout here in London lodgings, with only us to nurse him, and my mother away. Our alarm was so great that we quite forgot the curious circumstance which had first attracted us, till Patty spoke up from her bed on the floor. I hope master bean't going to be very ill, and that, you know, came for a warning. Do we think it was a bird, Mistress Dorothy? Very likely. Now, Patty, let us go to sleep. But I did not. For all night I heard my father groaning at intervals. I was certain it was the gout, and wished from the bottom of my heart that we had gone home with mother. What was my surprise when quite early I heard him rise and go down, just as if nothing was ailing him. I found him sitting at the breakfast table in his travelling coat, looking very haggard and miserable, but evidently bent on a journey. Father, you are not going to Bath? Yes, I be. Not till the evening coach starts, I cried, alarmed. We can't, you know. I'll take a post-chaise then. We must be off in an hour. An hour! The cruel pain of parting. My dear, I believe I used to feel things keenly when I was young. Shot through me, through and through. A single hour, and I should have said good-bye to Edmund. One of those heartbreaking farewells when we seem to leave half of our poor young life behind us, forgetting that the only real parting is when there is no love left to part from. A few years, and I wondered how I could have crept away and wept in such intolerable agony at the mere bidding good-bye to Edmund, Edmund who loved me. Every minute seemed a day till he came in as usual to breakfast. My red eyes and my father's corded trunk explained all. "Dr. Thwaite, you are not going?" "Yes, I be," repeated my father. He sat moodily leaning on the table, would not taste his breakfast. "Not till the night coach, surely? I was to take you and Mistress Dorothy to see Mr. Benjamin West, the king's painter." "Let kings and painters alone, lad. I be going home to my dolly." Mr. Everest used many arguments, gay and grave, upon which I hung with earnest conviction and hope. He made things so clear always. He was a man of much brighter parts than my father, and had great influence over him. "Dorothy," he whispered, "help me to persuade the doctor. It is so little time I beg for, only a few hours, and before so long a parting." "Aye, longer than he thought, or I." "Children," cried my father at last, "you are a couple of fools. Wait till you have been married 20 years. I must go now to my dolly. I know there is something amiss at home." I should have felt alarmed, but I saw Mr. Everest smile, and besides, I was yet glowing under his fond look as my father spoke of our being married 20 years. "Father, you have surely no reason for thinking this. If you have, tell us." My father just lifted his head and looked me woefully in the face. "Dorothy, last night, as sure as I see you now, I saw your mother." "Is that all?" cried Mr. Everest, laughing. "Why, my good sir, of course you did. You were dreaming." "I had not gone to sleep." "How did you see her?" "Coming into the room just as she used to do in the bedroom at home, with a candle in her hand and the baby asleep on her arm." "Did she speak?" asked Mr. Everest with another and rather satirical smile. "Remember, you saw Hamlet last night." "Indeed, sir, indeed, Dorothy, it was a mere dream. I do not believe in ghosts. It would be an insult to common sense, to human wisdom, nay, even to divinity itself." Edmund spoke so earnestly, so justly, so affectionately, that perforce I agreed, and even my father began to feel rather ashamed of his own weakness. He, a physician, the head of a family, to yield to a mere superstitious fancy, springing probably from a hot supper and an over-excited brain. To the same cause Mr. Everest attributed the other incident, which, somewhat hesitatingly, I told him. "Dear, it was a bird, nothing but a bird. One flew in at my window last spring. It had hurt itself, and I kept it and nursed it and petted it. It was such a pretty, gentle little thing. It put me in mind of Dorothy." "Did it?" I said. "And at last it got well and flew away." Ah, that was not like Dorothy. Thus, my father being persuaded, it was not hard to persuade me. We settled to remain till evening. Edmund and I, with my maid Patty, went about together, chiefly in Mr. West's gallery, and in the quiet shade of our favorite temple gardens. And if for those 4 stolen hours, and the sweetness in them, I afterwards suffered untold remorse and bitterness, I have entirely forgiven myself, as I know my dear mother would have forgiven me long ago. Mrs. MacArthur stopped, wiped her eyes, and then continued, speaking more in the matter-of-fact way that old people speak than she had been lately doing. "Well, my dear, where was I?" "In the Temple Gardens." "Yes, yes. Well, we came home to dinner. My father always enjoyed his dinner and his nap afterwards. He had nearly recovered himself now, only looked tired from loss of rest. Edmund and I sat in the window watching the barges and wherries down the Thames. There were no steamboats then, you know. Someone knocked at the door with a message from my father, but he slept so heavily he did not hear. Mr. Everest went to see what it was. I stood at the window. I remember mechanically watching the red sail of a Margate hoy that was going down the river, and thinking with a sharp pang how dark the room seemed in a moment, with Edmund not there. Re-entering after a somewhat long absence, he never looked at me, but went straight to my father. "Sir, it is almost time for you to start." "Oh, Edmund." "There is a coach at the door, and pardon me, but I think you should travel quickly." My father sprang to his feet. "Dear sir, indeed there is no need for anxiety now. But I have received news. You have another little daughter, sir, and—" "Dolly! My Dolly!" Without another word, my father rushed away without his hat, leapt into the post-chaise that was waiting, and drove off. "Edmund!" I gasped. My poor little girl, my own Dorothy. By the tenderness of his embrace, not lover-like, but brother-like, by his tears, for I could feel them on my neck, I knew as well as if he had told me that I should never see my dear mother any more. "She had died in childbirth," continued the old lady after a long pause. "Died at night, at the very hour and minute when I had heard the tapping on the window pane, and my father had thought he saw her coming into his room with a baby on her arm." "Was the baby dead too?" "They thought so then, but it afterwards revived." "What a strange story!" "I do not ask you to believe in it. How and why and what it was I cannot tell. I only know that it assuredly was so." "And Mr. Everest?" I inquired after some hesitation. The old lady shook her head. My dear, you will soon learn how very, very seldom one marries one's first love. After that day I did not see Mr. Everest for 20 years. "How wrong! How—" "Don't blame him. It was not his fault. You see, after that time my father took a prejudice against him, not unnatural, perhaps, and she was not there to make things straight. Besides, my own conscience was very sore, and there were the 6 children at home, and the little baby had no mother. So at last I made up my mind. I should have loved him just the same if we had waited 20 years. But he could not see things so. Don't blame him, my dear, don't blame him. It was as well, perhaps, as things turned out." "Did he marry?" "Yes, after a few years, and loved his wife dearly. When I was about 31, I married Mr. MacArthur. So neither of us was unhappy, you see, at least not more so than most people, and we became sincere friends afterwards. Mr. and Mrs. Everest come to see me almost every Sunday. Why, you foolish child, you are not crying?" I was, but scarcely at the ghost story.
The Tomb of Sarah by F.G. Loring. My father was the head of a celebrated firm of church restorers and decorators about 60 years ago. He took a keen interest in his work, and made an especial study of any old legends or family histories that came under his observation. He was necessarily very well read and thoroughly well posted in all questions of folklore and medieval legend. As he kept a careful record of every case he investigated, the manuscripts he left at his death have a special interest. From amongst them I have selected the following, as being a particularly weird and extraordinary experience. In presenting it to the public, I feel it is superfluous to apologize for its supernatural character. My Father's Diary. 1841. June 17th. Received a commission from my old friend Peter Grant to enlarge and restore the chancel of his church at Haggerston, in the wilds of the West Country. July 5th. Went down to Haggerston with my headman Summers. A very long and tiring journey. July 7th. got the work well started. The old church is one of special interest to the antiquarian, and I shall endeavour while restoring it to alter the existing arrangements as little as possible. One large tomb, however, must be moved bodily 10 feet at least to the southward. Curiously enough, there is a somewhat forbidding inscription upon it in Latin, and I am sorry that this particular tomb should have to be moved. It stands amongst the graves of the Kenyans, an old family which has been extinct in these parts for centuries. The inscription on it runs thus: Sarah, 1630. For the sake of the dead and the welfare of the living, let this sepulchre remain untouched and its occupant undisturbed till the coming of Christ. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. July 8th. Took counsel with Grant concerning the Sarah tomb. We are both very loath to disturb it, but the ground has sunk so beneath it that the safety of the church is in danger. Thus we have no choice. However, the work shall be done as reverently as possible under our own direction. Grant says there is a legend in the neighbourhood that it is the tomb of the last of the Kenyans, the evil Countess Sarah, who was murdered in 1630. She lived quite alone in the old castle, whose ruins still stand 3 miles from here on the road to Bristol. Her reputation was an evil one, even for those days. She was a witch, or werewoman, the only companion of her solitude being a familiar in the shape of a huge Asiatic wolf. This creature was reputed to seize upon children, or failing these, sheep and other small animals, and convey them to the castle, where the Countess used to suck their blood. It was popularly supposed that she could never be killed. This, however, proved a fallacy, since she was strangled one day by a mad peasant woman who had lost 2 children, she declaring that they had both been seized and carried off by the Countess's familiar. This is a very interesting story, since it points to a local superstition very similar to that of the vampire, existing in Slavonic and Hungarian Europe. The tomb is built of black marble, surmounted by an enormous slab of the same material. On the slab is a magnificent group of figures. A young and handsome woman reclines upon a couch. Round her neck is a piece of rope, the end of which she holds in her hand. At her side is a gigantic dog with bared fangs and lolling tongue. The face of the reclining figure is a cruel one. The corners of the mouth are curiously lifted, showing the sharp points of long canine or dog teeth. The whole group, though magnificently executed, leaves a most unpleasant sensation. If we move the tomb, it will have to be done in 2 pieces, the covering slab first, and then the tomb proper. We have decided to remove the covering slab tomorrow. July 9th, 6 p.m. A very strange day. By noon everything was ready for lifting off the covering stone, and after the men's dinner we started the jacks and pulleys. The slab lifted easily enough, though it fitted closely into its seat and was further secured by some sort of mortar or putty, which must have kept the interior perfectly airtight. None of us were prepared for the horrible rush of foul, mouldy air that escaped as the cover lifted clear of its seating, and the contents that gradually came into view were more startling still. There lay the fully dressed body of a woman, wizened and shrunk and ghastly pale, as if from starvation. Round her neck was a loose cord, and, judging by the scars still visible, the story of death by strangulation was true enough. The most horrible part, however, was the extraordinary freshness of the body. Except for the appearance of starvation, life might have been only just extinct. The flesh was soft and white, the eyes were wide open, and seemed to stare at us with a fearful understanding in them. The body itself lay on mould, without any pretence to coffin or shell. For several moments we gazed with horrible curiosity, and then it became too much for my workmen, who implored us to replace the covering slab. That, of course, we would not do, but I set the carpenters to work at once to make a temporary cover while we moved the tomb to its new position. This is a long job, and will take 2 or 3 days at least. July 9th, 9 p.m. Just at sunset we were startled by the howling of, seemingly, every dog in the village. It lasted for 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour, and then ceased as suddenly as it began. This, and a curious mist that has risen round the church, makes me feel rather anxious about the Sarah tomb. According to the best established traditions of the vampire-haunted countries, the disturbance of dogs or wolves at sunset is supposed to indicate the presence of one of these fiends, and local fog is always considered to be a certain sign. The vampire has the power of producing it for the purpose of concealing its movements near its hiding place at any time. I dare not mention or even hint my fears to the rector, for he is, not unnaturally perhaps, a rank disbeliever in many things that I know, from experience, are not only possible, but even probable. I must work this out alone at first, and get his aid without his knowing in what direction he is helping me. I shall now watch till midnight at least. 10:15 p.m. As I feared and half expected, just before 10 there was another outburst of the hideous howling. It was commenced most distinctly by a particularly horrible and blood-curdling wail from the vicinity of the churchyard. The chorus lasted only a few minutes, however, and at the end of it I saw a large dark shape, like a huge dog, emerge from the fog and lope away at a rapid canter towards the open country. Assuming this to be what I fear, I shall see it return soon after midnight. 12:30 p.m. I was right. Almost as midnight struck, I saw the beast returning. It stopped at the spot where the fog seemed to commence, and lifting up its head, gave tongue to that particularly horrible long-drawn wail that I had noticed as preceding the outburst earlier in the evening. Tomorrow I shall tell the rector what I have seen, and if, as I expect, we hear of some neighbouring sheepfold having been raided, I shall get him to watch with me for this nocturnal marauder. I shall also examine the Sarah tomb for something which he may notice without any previous hint from me. July 10th. I found the workmen this morning much disturbed in mind about the howling of the dogs. "We don't like it, sir," one of them said to me. "We don't like it. There was something abroad last night that was unholy." They were still more uncomfortable when the news came round that a large dog had made a raid upon a flock of sheep, scattering them far and wide, and leaving 3 of them dead with torn throats in the field. When I told the rector of what I had seen and what was being said in the village, he immediately decided that we must try and catch, or at least identify, the beast I had seen. "Of course," said he, "it is some dog lately imported into the neighbourhood, for I know of nothing about here nearly as large as the animal you describe, though its size may be due to the deceptive moonlight." This afternoon I asked the rector, as a favour, to assist me in lifting the temporary cover that was on the tomb, giving as an excuse the reason that I wished to obtain a portion of the curious mortar with which it had been sealed. After a slight demur he consented, and we raised the lid. If the sight that met our eyes gave me a shock, at least it appalled Grant. "Great God!" he exclaimed. "The woman is alive!" And so it seemed for a moment. The corpse had lost much of its starved appearance, and looked hideously fresh and alive. It was still wrinkled and shrunken, but the lips were firm, and the rich red hue of health. The eyes, if possible, were more appalling than ever, though fixed and staring. At one corner of the mouth I thought I noticed a slight dark-coloured froth, but I said nothing about it then. "Take your piece of mortar, Harry," gasped Grant, "and let us shut the tomb again. God help me, parson though I am, such dead faces frighten me." Nor was I sorry to hide that terrible face again, but I got my bit of mortar, and I have advanced a step towards the solution of the mystery. This afternoon the tomb was moved several feet towards its new position, but it will be 2 or 3 days yet before we shall be ready to replace the slab. 10:15 p.m. Again the same howling at sunset, the same great fog enveloping the church, and at 10 o'clock the same great beast slipping silently out into the open country. I must get the rector's help and watch for its return. But precautions we must take, for if things are as I believe, we take our lives in our hands when we venture out into the night to waylay the vampire. Why not admit it at once? For that the beast I have seen is the vampire of that evil thing in the tomb, I can have no reasonable doubt. Not yet come to its full strength, thank heaven! After the starvation of nearly 2 centuries, for at present it can only maraud as wolf, apparently. But in a day or 2, when full power returns, that dreadful woman, in new strength and beauty, will be able to leave her refuge. Then it would not be sheep merely that would satisfy her disgusting lust for blood, but victims that would yield their life-blood without a murmur to her caressing touch, victims that, dying of her foul embrace, themselves must become vampires in their turn to prey on others. Mercifully, my knowledge gives me a safeguard, for that little piece of mortar that I rescued today from the tomb contains a portion of the sacred host, and who holds it, humbly and firmly believing in its virtue, may pass safely through such an ordeal as I intend to submit myself and the rector to tonight. 12:30 p.m. Our adventure is over for the present, and we are back safe. After writing the last entry recorded above, I went off to find Grant and tell him that the marauder was out on the prowl again. "But, Grant," I said, "before we start out tonight, I must insist that you will let me prosecute this affair in my own way. You must promise to put yourself completely under my orders, without asking any questions as to the why and wherefore." After a little demur and some excusable chaff on his part at the serious view I was taking of what he called a dog hunt, he gave me his promise. I then told him that we were to watch tonight and try and track the mysterious beast, but not to interfere with it in any way. I think, in spite of his jests, that I impressed him with the fact that there might be, after all, good reason for my precautions. It was just after 11 when we stepped out into the still night. Our first move was to try and penetrate the dense fog round the church, but there was something so chilly about it, and a faint smell so disgustingly rank and loathsome, that neither our nerves nor our stomachs were proof against it. Instead, we stationed ourselves in the dark shadow of a yew tree that commanded a good view of the wicket entrance to the churchyard. At midnight, the howling of the dogs began again, and in a few minutes we saw a large grey shape, with green eyes shining like lamps, shamble swiftly down the path towards us. The rector started forward, but I laid a firm hand upon his arm and whispered a warning, "Remember!" Then we both stood very still and watched as the great beast cantered swiftly by. It was real enough, for we could hear the clicking of its nails on the stone flags. It passed within a few yards of us, and seemed to be nothing more nor less than a great grey wolf, thin and gaunt, with bristling hair and dripping jaws. It stopped where the mist commenced, and turned round. It was truly a horrible sight, and made one's blood run cold. The eyes burnt like fires, the upper lip was snarling and raised, showing the great canine teeth, while round the mouth clung and dripped a dark-coloured froth. It raised its head and gave tongue to its long wailing howl, which was answered from afar by the village dogs. After standing for a few moments, it turned and disappeared into the thickest part of the fog. Very shortly afterwards the atmosphere began to clear, and within 10 minutes the mist was all gone. The dogs in the village were silent, and the night seemed to reassume its normal aspect. We examined the spot where the beast had been standing, and found, plainly enough upon the stone flags, dark spots of froth and saliva. "Well, Rector," I said, "will you admit now, in view of the things you have seen today, in consideration of the legend, the woman in the tomb, the fog, the howling dogs, and, last but not least, the mysterious beast you have seen so close, that there is something not quite normal in it all? Will you put yourself unreservedly in my hands and help me, whatever I may do, to first make assurance doubly sure, and finally take the necessary steps for putting an end to this horror of the night?" I saw that the uncanny influence of the night was strong upon him, and wished to impress it as much as possible. "Needs must," he replied, "when the devil drives, and in the face of what I have seen I must believe that some unholy forces are at work. Yet how can they work in the sacred precincts of a church? Shall we not call rather upon heaven to assist us in our need?" "Grant," I said solemnly, "that we must do, each in his own way. God helps those who help themselves, and by his help and the light of my knowledge, we must fight this battle for him and the poor lost soul within." We then returned to the rectory and to our rooms, though I have sat up to write this account while the scene is fresh in my mind. July 11th. Found the workmen again very much disturbed in their minds, and full of a strange dog that had been seen during the night by several people who had hunted it. Farmer Stotman, who had been watching his sheep, the same flock that had been raided the night before, had surprised it over a fresh carcass and tried to drive it off, but its size and fierceness so alarmed him that he had beaten a hasty retreat for a gun. When he returned the animal was gone, though he found that 3 more sheep from his flock were dead and torn. The Sarah tomb was moved today to its new position, but it was a long, heavy business, and there was not time to replace the covering slab. For this I was glad, as in the prosaic light of day the rector almost disbelieves the events of the night, and is prepared to think everything to have been magnified and distorted by our imagination. As, however, I could not possibly proceed with my war of extermination against this foul thing without assistance, and as there is nobody else I can rely upon, I appealed to him for one more night, to convince him that it was no delusion, but a ghastly, horrible truth, which must be fought and conquered for our own sakes, as well as that of all those living in the neighbourhood. "Put yourself in my hands, Rector," I said, "for tonight, at least. Let us take those precautions which my study of the subject tells me are the right ones. Tonight you and I must watch in the church, and I feel assured that tomorrow you will be as convinced as I am, and be equally prepared to take those awful steps which I know to be proper, and I must warn you that we shall find a more startling change in the body lying there than you noticed yesterday." My words came true, for on raising the wooden cover once more, the rank stench of a slaughter-house arose, making us feel positively sick. There lay the vampire, but how changed from the starved and shrunken corpse we saw 2 days ago for the first time! The wrinkles had almost disappeared, the flesh was firm and full, the crimson lips grinned horribly over the long pointed teeth, and a distinct smear of blood had trickled down one corner of the mouth. We set our teeth, however, and hardened our hearts. Then we replaced the cover, and put what we had collected into a safe place in the vestry. Yet even now Grant could not believe that there was any real or pressing danger concealed in that awful tomb, as he raised strenuous objections to any apparent desecration of the body without further proof. This he shall have tonight. God grant that I am not taking too much on myself. If there is any truth in old legends, it would be easy enough to destroy the vampire now, but Grant will not have it. I hope for the best of this night's work, but the danger in waiting is very great. 6 p.m. I have prepared everything: the sharp knives, the pointed stake, fresh garlic, and the wild dog roses. All these I have taken and concealed in the vestry, where we can get at them when our solemn vigil commences. If either or both of us die with our fearful task undone, let those reading my record see that this is done. I lay it upon them as a solemn obligation, that the vampire be pierced through the heart with the stake, then let the burial service be read over the poor clay, at last released from its doom. Thus shall the vampire cease to be, and a lost soul rest. July 12th. All is over. After the most terrible night of watching in horror, one vampire, at least, will trouble the world no more. But how thankful should we be to a merciful Providence that awful tomb was not disturbed by anyone not having the knowledge necessary to deal with its dreadful occupant. I write this with no feelings of self-complacency, but simply with a great gratitude for the years of study I have been able to devote to this special subject. And now to my tale. Just before sunset last night, the rector and I locked ourselves into the church, and took up our position in the pulpit. It was one of those pulpits, to be found in some churches, which is entered from the vestry, the preacher appearing at a good height through an arched opening in the wall. This gave us a sense of security, which we felt we needed, a good view of the interior, and direct access to the implements which I had concealed in the vestry. The sun set, and the twilight gradually deepened and faded. There was, so far, no sign of the usual fog, nor any howling of the dogs. At 9 o'clock the moon rose, and her pale light gradually flooded the aisles, and still no sign of any kind from the Sarah tomb. The rector had asked me several times what he might expect, but I was determined that no words or thought of mine should influence him, and that he should be convinced by his own senses alone. By 10:30 we were both getting very tired, and I began to think that perhaps, after all, we should see nothing that night. However, soon after 11 we observed a light mist rising from the Sarah tomb. It seemed to scintillate and sparkle as it rose, and curled in a sort of pillar or spiral. I said nothing, but I heard the rector give a sort of gasp as he clutched my arm feverishly. "Great heaven!" he whispered, "it is taking shape!" And true enough, in a very few moments we saw, standing erect by the tomb, the ghastly figure of the Countess Sarah. She looked thin and haggard still, and her face was deadly white, but the crimson lips looked like a hideous gash in the pale cheeks, and her eyes glared like red coals in the gloom of the church. It was a fearful thing to watch as she stepped unsteadily down the aisle, staggering a little as if from weakness and exhaustion. This was, perhaps, natural, as her body must have suffered much physically from her long incarceration, in spite of the unholy forces which kept it fresh and well. We watched her to the door and wondered what would happen, but it appeared to present no difficulty, for she melted through it and disappeared. "Now, Grant," I said, "do you believe?" "Yes," he replied, "I must. Everything is in your hands, and I will obey your commands to the letter, if you can only instruct me how to rid my poor people of this unnamable terror." "By God's help I will," said I, "but you shall be yet more convinced first, for we have a terrible work to do, and much to answer for in the future, before we leave the church again this morning. And now to work, for in its present weak state the vampire will not wander far, but may return at any time, and must not find us unprepared." We stepped down from the pulpit, and taking dog roses and garlic from the vestry, proceeded to the tomb. I arrived first, and throwing off the wooden cover, cried, "Look, it is empty!" There was nothing there, nothing except the impress of the body in the loose, damp mould. I took the flowers and laid them in a circle round the tomb, for legend teaches us that vampires will not pass over these particular blossoms if they can avoid it. Then, 8 or 10 feet away, I made a circle on the stone pavement, large enough for the rector and myself to stand in, and within the circle I placed the implements that I had brought into the church with me. "Now," I said, "from this circle, which nothing unholy can step across, you shall see the vampire face to face, and see her afraid to cross that other circle of garlic and dog roses to regain her unholy refuge. But on no account step beyond the holy place you stand in, for the vampire has a fearful strength not her own, and, like a snake, can draw her victim willingly to his own destruction. Now, so far my work was done, and, calling the rector, we stepped into the holy circle to await the vampire's return. Nor was this long delayed. Presently a damp, cold odour seemed to pervade the church, which made our hair bristle and flesh to creep. And then, down the aisle with noiseless feet, came that which we watched for. I heard the rector mutter a prayer, and I held him tightly by the arm, for he was shivering violently. Long before we could distinguish the features, we saw the glowing eyes and the crimson, sensual mouth. She went straight to her tomb, but stopped short when she encountered my flowers. She walked right round the tomb, seeking a place to enter, and as she walked, she saw us. A spasm of diabolical hate and fury passed over her face, but it quickly vanished, and a smile of love, more devilish still, took its place. She stretched out her arms towards us. Then we saw that round her mouth gathered a bloody froth, and from under her lips long pointed teeth gleamed and champed. She spoke, a soft, soothing voice, a voice that carried a spell with it, and affected us both strangely, particularly the rector. I wished to test as far as possible, without endangering our lives, the vampire's power. Her voice had a soporific effect, which I resisted easily enough, but which seemed to throw the rector into a sort of trance. More than this, it seemed to compel him to her, in spite of his efforts to resist. "Come," she said, "come. I give sleep and peace, sleep and peace, sleep and peace." She advanced a little towards us, but not far, for I noted that the sacred circle seemed to keep her back like an iron hand. My companion seemed to become demoralized and spellbound. He tried to step forward, and finding me detain him, whispered, "Harry, let go! I must go! She is calling me! I must! Oh, help me! Help me!" And he began to struggle. It was time to finish. "Grant," I cried in a loud, firm voice, "in the name of all that you hold sacred, have done and play the man." He shuddered violently and gasped, "Where am I?" Then he remembered and clung to me convulsively for a moment. At this a look of damnable hate changed the smiling face before us, and with a sort of shriek she staggered back. "Back!" I cried. "Back to your unholy tomb! No longer shall you molest the suffering world. Your end is near." It was fear that now showed itself in her beautiful face, for it was beautiful in spite of its horror. As she shrank back, and over the circlet of flowers, shivering as she did so. At last, with a low, mournful cry, she appeared to melt back again into her tomb. As she did so, the first gleams of the rising sun lit up the world, and I knew all danger was over for the day. Taking Grant by the arm, I drew him with me out of the circle, and led him to the tomb. There lay the vampire once more, still in her living death, as we had a moment before seen her in her devilish life. But in the eyes remained that awful expression of hate and cringing, appalling fear. Grant was pulling himself together. "Now," I said, "will you dare the last terrible act, and rid the world forever of this horror?" "By God," he said solemnly, "I will. Tell me what to do." "Help me to lift her out of her tomb. She can harm us no more," I replied. With averted faces we set to our terrible task and laid her out upon the flags. "Now," I said, "read the burial service over the poor body, and then let us give it its release from this living hell that holds it." Reverently the rector read the beautiful words, and reverently I made the necessary responses. When it was over I took the stake and, without giving myself time to think, plunged it with all my strength through the heart. As though really alive, the body for a moment writhed and kicked convulsively, and an awful heart-rending shriek woke the silent church. Then all was still. Then we lifted the poor body back, and, thank God, the consolation that legend tells us is never denied to those who have to do such awful work as ours, came at last. Over the face stole a great and solemn peace. The lips lost their crimson hue. The prominent, sharp teeth sank back into the mouth, and for a moment we saw before us the calm, pale face of a most beautiful woman, who smiled as she slept. A few minutes more, and she faded away to dust before our eyes as we watched. We set to work and cleaned up every trace of our work, and then departed for the rectory. Most thankful were we to step out of the church, with its horrible associations, into the rosy warmth of the summer morning. With the above and the notes in my father's diary, though a few days later this further entry occurs. July 15th. Since the 12th everything has been quiet and as usual. We replaced and sealed up the Sarah tomb this morning. The workmen were surprised to find the body had disappeared, but took it to be the natural result of exposing it to the air. One odd thing came to my ears today. It appears that the child of one of the villagers strayed from home the night of the 11th inst, and was found asleep in a coppice near the church, very pale and quite exhausted. There were 2 small marks on her throat, which have since disappeared. What does this mean? I have, however, kept it to myself, as, now that the vampire is no more, no further danger either to that child or any other is to be apprehended. It is only those who die of the vampire's embrace that become vampires at death in their turn.